Forgiveness is essential for our personal and spiritual growth. Forgiveness helps us on all levels: physical, emotional, mental, and it is also the key to spiritual enlightenment. If we look at some of the wisdom that's been left behind by some of the great enlightened masters, they've all talked about forgiveness. Krishna in India, who is known as Vishnu or Narayan or the incarnation of God, he talked about forgiveness in the Gita. Prophet Muhammad talked about forgiveness. Jesus Christ talked about forgiveness. Guru Nanak, Sant Kabir. If you look at all the monotheistic scriptures, like the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, they've all talked about forgiveness. They all mention forgiveness. If you look at the Vedas, which are the oldest scriptures on the planet, it definitely talks about the importance of forgiveness. Today, scientists, doctors, medical professionals, and healers are all talking about the importance and the power of forgiveness. There are certain academic institutions and universities like Harvard and a few others who have entire courses on forgiveness and how it directly affects your health, your happiness, and your physiology. I would like to share a wonderful testimonial with you which explains the power of forgiveness. This particular testimonial comes from Dr. Norman Shealy. He is the founder of the American Holistic Medicine and Association. He is a world-renowned neurosurgeon. Dr. Shealy uses meditation, guided visualizations, relaxation therapy, and many other holistic methods to heal his patients. He calls his techniques biogenics, and he has been able to heal thousands of patients suffering from all kinds of diseases. Here is a remarkable true story of a woman who was suffering from breast cancer. So Dr. Shealy, in his book called Miracles Do Happen, A Physician's Experience with Alternative Medicine, he recounts true stories of hundreds of ordinary people who have miraculously recovered from crippling and often terminal diseases through the use of alternative medicine. Here is a quote from his book. A 50-year-old black woman I call AZ arrived on April 30th, 1974 with generalized back pain and massively widespread cancer of the breast. Her oncologist had told her and her family she had at best 3 months to live. And then Dr. Shealy goes on and says, I was not certain she'd last 3 weeks. She was so weak she could not walk. She vomited most of her food. Her body was further weakened by extensive radiation therapy and chemotherapy, which had failed to slow her cancer. On the 7th day of treatment, I performed with AZ a guided exercise on forgiveness. She had been brought into the room on a stretcher, but after the experience, she arose and walked out of the room pain-free. Half the people in the room were in tears. 3 months later, AZ's cancer was totally gone, never to return. A year and a half later, Dr. Shealy saw AZ again. She was happy and healthy. AZ then told Dr. Shealy, quote, during that forgiveness exercise you did on me, I suddenly realized how much I hate my family, and I was determined not to let my family make me sick and made a strong decision to get well. So this testimonial was from Dr. Sheely's book, and apparently AZ had a very difficult life and very difficult experiences with her family members. And these difficult experiences caused a lot of pain and suffering for AZ, and then it eventually manifested as cancer of the breast. So sometimes we speak about the fact that certain illnesses can be psychosomatic, meaning it has a body and mind connection. So the problem starts with your emotions or your mind or your karmic experiences, when you're coming from very difficult experiences, especially personal family experiences. And when you don't know how to deal with these experiences, they can manifest as serious diseases. So here's one example from a physician, a neurosurgeon who shares examples of patients who are recovering from forgiveness therapy and alternative medicine. Now, forgiveness has been mentioned by many, many spiritual masters over the course of history. When Jesus Christ was being put on the cross, he immediately said, "Forgive them because they don't know what they're doing." The great Sufi mystic Mansur al-Hallaj, he was also put on the cross. And not very many people know about the history of this mystic, but even he suffered a very brutal and a dramatic death. And while people were torturing him, he also came out and expressed the words, "Forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand me, they don't understand what I'm saying. So forgive them." Mansur al-Hallaj, who is known as one of the greatest Sufi mystics, he used to make a statement called Ana al-Haq, meaning I am the truth, or I'm the ultimate reality. This caused a conflict between the external laws of Islam, what they refer to as Sharia, and the spiritual consciousness and the spiritual experience. It's the two different paths altogether. So the teachings of the scripture, the basic literal orthodox teachings of the scripture, were in conflict with the statements that Mansur made, because al-Haq means the truth. So al-Haq means I am the truth. And al-Haq is one of the names of Allah or God. So when he said al-Haq, I am the truth, they took it that he was saying that I am God. It's a stage in meditation or consciousness that can only happen to one to perhaps millions or billions of people. It is a very deep, very high stage of enlightenment. Very similar to the statements Aham Brahmasmi, meaning I am the divine or I'm the creator, which is mentioned in the Vedas. And very similar to the sayings of the Bible and Jesus, where it says, "Be still and know that I am God." So it's a very advanced stage of consciousness and enlightenment, which the majority of the people will not understand. And you've heard me speak before about the different levels of the soul: young souls, intermediate souls, and old souls. The majority of the people on this planet are still young souls, something that Michael Newton has talked about in his book, Journey of Souls. So if you repeat a statement like that to a person or people who have very basic levels of consciousness, obviously there's going to be a conflict. So there's always a conflict between orthodox religious beliefs and understanding and rules, and pure spirituality, which is very subjective, based on personal search, experience, and enlightenment. Is two different things altogether. But sometimes when the two come across each other, there's a conflict. And this is what happened. So there's a lot of talk right now about life after death and what happens after death. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that in the context of forgiveness. So a human being ends up living in this world for a certain number of years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, 100 years, sometimes a lot less, sometimes a bit more. When the person has lived a full life and it's time for them to move on, the soul slowly departs from the physical body and it makes its way up. The dimension upstairs can be referred to in different ways. It can be referred to as heaven, It can be referred to as the astral plane. It can be referred to as the spirit world or the world of light. Different people use different terminology. The word heaven is a beautiful name. A lot of people like to use it. So, when your life on this planet is over and it's time for you to move on, your soul slowly departs from the physical world and it goes into the spirit world towards heaven. What happens when it goes towards heaven? Well, initially, it's a celebration because the soul finally is escaping from the prison of the physical body and it goes into the world of light, into heaven. It becomes totally free. So now your wings open up, you begin to fly. Your previously departed family members come to receive you. There are angels there that come to receive you. Your spirit guides, ascended masters, they're all there. And also, it's a bit of a party upstairs because all your relatives and all the people who know you, they know you're about to come upstairs. So they create a little bit of a party for you, a spiritual party. So you're going from the world of matter to the world of spirit. So there's a welcoming party for you upstairs. So it's a celebration. So in the first few moments, when you go upstairs, it's a beautiful experience. Now, of course, there are certain things that you're very concerned about when you go up. The first thing you're concerned about is your family members and your friends. You want to make sure they're okay because you've passed on. So they must be sad, they must be grieving, they must be going through a difficult time. So you're concerned about this. But at the same time, there's a party going on here. There's a spiritual party. My grandmother is here. My pet who left me so many years ago is here to receive me. All these angelic beings. This world is full of light. A complete contrast compared to where I was on planet Earth. And then as time goes by, the transition process takes place. After a certain time, there are different transition processes you go through. So initially you're received upstairs and there's a welcoming party for you. You get to meet all your previously departed family members, friends, pets, animals, your spirit guides. It's a reunion. It's a beautiful experience. But then as time goes by, there's another process that takes place. And this process is referred to as the life review process. There is a recap, a review of what you experienced on this planet in your previous lifetime. Now, there are several prominent individuals who have talked about this review process. One of them, of course, is Michael Newton. He refers to this process in Life Between Lives. In his book, Journey of Souls. He has many books. But there's a special process and time frame that he refers to as life between lives. So this is the time when you're in between your physical incarnations in the spirit world, in heaven. What happens there? So he calls it life between lives. So in life between lives, there is a specific process that takes place, which is called the life review process. It's a recap of what you experienced in your previous lifetime. So Michael Newton talks about this. Another person that talks about this is Dr. Raymond Moody. He is the one who coined the phrase near-death experience. He has interviewed and documented hundreds and thousands of people. A lot of them are even professionals and doctors who have had near-death experiences, who were clinically dead physically, went into the spirit world and then came back into the physical world, and then they shared their experience with Dr. Raymond Moody in interviews. So Dr. Raymond Moody also is talking about the life review process. He mentions many different things. There are several things that are in common that people experience when they pass away, right? One is that their family members come to receive them. Another one is you go through a tunnel experience, going from one end of the tunnel to the other. Once you're upstairs, you have a top view of your room and of the planet. You can see everything. You can see your old body, you can see the doctors, you can see the parents, you can see all these things. Then he says, all your family members and relatives are there to receive you. It's a place of light, right? Then he also talks about a life review process. So Dr. Raymond Moody is talking about this as well. Dolores Cannon, who is a pioneer of past life regression therapy, even before Dr. Michael Newton and Brian Weiss and all the other regression therapists that we know about, she was one of the first ones to talk about it. She also is talking about a life review process. What you experienced in your previous life is replayed in minute detail. It's like watching a TV camera and the movie of your own previous life comes on in minute detail. Who else is talking about this? There are mediums and psychic mediums talking about that too. There is a very young, talented psychic medium in the US today that is also talking about the life review process. And his name is Matt Fraser. He's a psychic medium. And he's also talking about the life review process. Life review process has also been mentioned before by mystics and enlightened masters. It's nothing new. It's just that these prominent members that I'm talking about, all these healers, all these people who have done regression therapy or who are healers, who are mediums and psychic mediums, what they're saying is no different than what the mystics had mentioned earlier. But it's nice to see that there's a variety of different people with different qualifications and gifts that are talking about the same thing. So the life review process, what is it? So from the time you're born, so say you're taking birth, whether it's in a hospital or a home, your parents are present. In the review process, in the spirit world, in heaven, it's a replay of your own movie. So it gets replayed in front of you. So you're born as a baby. Some are laughing, some are crying. And the mother's holding the baby, you can see this. Then the baby grows up. When it first starts to crawl, to stand up, to walk. The first birthday, meeting friends, first time you ride a bike. All these things are replayed in front of you. We forget as human beings, obviously, right? So all these events are replayed in minute detail. The people you come into contact with, how you treated them. Did you treat them with anger, control, jealousy? That gets replayed. And every time that's replayed, if you didn't act consciously, karmically, it causes great dissatisfaction and discontentment for you. If you conducted your life in a way where you shared love, compassion, forgiveness, and empathy, this brings you immense pleasure and happiness, immense satisfaction. So this is all being replayed. Now, when you're in the spirit world, you're in a very pure form because the physical body has been dropped on this planet. So whatever difficulties you had with the physical body, your illness, your sufferings, certain social habits that you had, all the difficulties, Earth is a difficult place. It's a place of struggle, it's a place of difficulty. It's a place where there's suffering. It's not easy, but we come here for a reason. So once you drop the body, in a sense, all your suffering and all your difficulties, you leave a lot of that behind. And when you go in the spirit world, you're in spirit form. So you're in a much more pure form. And your emotions and your thoughts and your mental body is at a greater balance. So imagine the best version of yourself. That's what you are in spirit form. And when you're reassessing your life review, when you're seeing all these actions that have taken place, you yourself will know what you did right and what you did wrong, whether you acted consciously or unconsciously. Your spirit guide and your relatives or the divine won't have to tell you. You will be telling yourself, oh my goodness, was that really me? Did I really conduct my actions in that way, either you're going to be happy or you're going to be sad. So we have the best and the purest version that goes up. That part of us, that little spark, which is our soul, which comes from God, that's the part that becomes active. Okay? So you're the best version of yourself when you go into the spirit world. Okay? So when the life review process is going on, your entire lifetime, from the time you were born, say you lived 80 years, for example, from the time you're born, and even before that, actually, it's in the time when you're in your mother's womb, even that's replayed. So from that time until your death, until your soul departs, all these activities, all these karmic activities have been recorded. They've been recorded by your own soul, which is kind of like your own PC or personal computer, and it's been recorded by the mainframe as well, the universal computer. Sometimes you can refer to that as Akashic records as well. Akashic records is a part of it. So this has been recorded by you, by your consciousness, your spirit, and by the universal consciousness as well, and this entire thing gets replayed. Now, when your life review is being replayed for you, there are certain moments which cause you great concern and dissatisfaction, and I'll just point out some of them. One of the things that has been pointed out by a lot of healers, Michael Newton, Dolores Cannon, even Matt Fraser, is that when a person commits suicide, that particular act is one of the greatest regret. You can't believe you did that. Okay, that causes great dissatisfaction. Dolores Cannon has actually said that when a person commits suicide, as soon as the soul comes out of the body, they actually try to re-enter the body again. Because when they're out, they come to a higher consciousness, a realization that I shouldn't have done that. Some of them actually try to go back. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing that causes grief or unhappiness when you're up there is, say you were suffering from an illness, say it was bipolar or schizophrenia or depression, or sadness or despondency, hopelessness, and you see that you had family members and friends that were actually trying to help you. This is when you come to the realization, oh my goodness, I had all these people in my life and they were trying to help me and I never listened to them. This brings them a lot of unhappiness, a lot of pain. Because at that point, what they're doing is they're mapping out their life and they're saying, okay, well, what if I would have taken a different path? What if I would have listened to this person, or I would have actually made a change? Then I wouldn't have been here. I would have actually been here. What if I didn't do this, this, and this? Would I still be here where I am now, or would I be here in terms of my consciousness? So you start looking at all these different scenarios, what you could have done compared to what you did. Okay? You're doing this in the spirit world. Okay, so the life review takes place, and quite often when you listen to mediums, so what mediums do is that they're actually channeling and they're connecting with the soul on the other side who has just departed from this world. So say a husband departed and the wife is grieving or the kids are grieving, sometimes they contact a medium, and a medium becomes an intermediary between the person in the spirit world who has just departed and the physical people on this plane. So he gives the message between the two. So the medium increases his consciousness and energy or vibration to connect with the spirit vibration. Then he takes the message in human terminology and human words and human concepts and brings it to the family members. A lot of times when they do these channelings, the spirit actually expresses that they're very sorry about the way they treated their family members, and they come out and tell their wife, you know what, you were my soulmate, you were my rock, what I did to you was very unfair, I shouldn't have done that. Because now I can see in the spirit world, I'm in a pure state, I can see my faults. Nobody has to tell me this. I have to apologize for the way I treated you, and then they have messages for their kids. Another thing that comes out is that quite often when family members pass away, say it's a difficult death, say they pass away in the hospital from an illness or from an accident, sometimes they're on the respirator, they actually come out and say to the family members that you may think I was suffering because I died in an accident or I died in a coma, but I wasn't actually suffering because God's light was protecting me and my guardian angels, everybody was there. So don't feel bad and don't feel sad because family members are crying that, this person passed away with such a difficult experience. So they're saying from the other side, no, it wasn't a difficult experience. That's what it looked like to you from a human perspective, but it wasn't a difficult experience. Then they continue to express other things as well. Now, what actually happens to the person when they're on the other side and they've acted unconsciously? So say someone has committed suicide, or someone had bipolar or schizophrenia and they took their own life, or they ended their life, or they ended up dying from substance abuse. Are they doomed? Is it over for them? No, of course not. They're not doomed, because really the place upstairs, if we want to call it heaven or the spirit world, there is really no such thing as hell. The astral dimension or the spirit world or heaven has many different levels and many different layers. Now, you've heard me talk about different levels of consciousness, going from young souls to intermediate souls to old souls. Young souls are at a very basic level of consciousness, so they're just developing their soul consciousness. So in my opinion, from what I understand, the younger souls, when they pass away, they will go to heaven, but they'll be in the lower boundaries of heaven. Okay? Now, I would divide up the spirit world or heaven into 3 major levels. But in between those 3 levels, there are hundreds of levels. Okay? So there's the lower level, the basic level, which is where the majority of the souls will go. So when they pass away, they're greeted by family members, their pets, ascended masters, and they go up to a certain level of consciousness. Okay? But then they stay at that level once they go up. Intermediate souls who have increased their level of consciousness will go slightly higher than that level, towards the middle. Okay? Their perception of spirituality is much deeper because they're older souls. Then they'll further work to increase their consciousness. Very, very few souls who are in the category of old souls or spiritually conscious souls, they'll go into the higher realm of the astral dimension or heaven. Okay? And they will stay there, and then they will further enhance their spirituality. Now, at the higher level, there are libraries there and there are schools that allow you to learn more esoteric principles and consciousness. There's more esoteric learning there. Okay? So they have special libraries, they have special masters at a high level that will take these souls who are older souls and train them to further develop their consciousness. Okay? Now, it's at this level, the 3rd level or the high level of heaven, where you can acquire angelic consciousness. Okay? Now, if you refer to the poetry by Rumi, the Sufi poet Rumi, he said, I was once in the form of a stone, then I became an animal, and then I became a human. After becoming a human, I'll raise my consciousness to become an angel. This is what he's talking about. So low, basic level of consciousness, young souls, intermediate souls, and then old souls. Okay? From old souls, you raise your level to angelic consciousness. Then there are levels beyond angelic consciousness too. That's where God consciousness comes in. And this is where Rumi says that even if I achieve the level of an angel, even if I achieve angelic consciousness, that's not good enough. I want to go higher. Because even angelic consciousness is limited. Okay? So people talk about heaven and they have their sights laid on heaven, but guess what? There are levels beyond heaven. That's where God consciousness comes in. So even heaven, as beautiful as it is, becomes a type of prison. It's a beautiful prison. Okay? If you're going to be a prison, you might as well be in a beautiful prison. We might as well call it heaven. But beyond heaven is where God consciousness starts. Okay? We all have to pass through it. We have to pass through heaven. But for those souls who are trying to merge with the essence, which is what Rumi was trying to do, which is what Mansur tried to do. A lot of the Christian mystics, the Essenes, they were on the same path of mysticism. Jesus Christ, Prophet Muhammad, they've all talked about this. So you're crossing heaven, you have your sights on heaven, but God consciousness is something beyond that too. Okay? So there are all these different stages. Now, generally speaking, for a soul who's had a difficult lifetime, let's just take an extreme example. Say somebody had schizophrenia and they ended their life and they ended up going to heaven, what happens to them? First of all, they will be accepted into heaven. Their relatives, their pets, the angelic beings, they will be there to accept them. First and foremost, they will be showered by what some refer as to the light of love, or the light of God. It's like if a person is sick, you take them to a hospital and you treat them. So if a person has gone through a difficult life in the physical world and they go in the spiritual world, immediately they're taken to that place where they're showered. They're showered with the light of unconditional love, the light of God. A lot of people and healers, when you ask them what is God, they'll say God is unconditional love. It doesn't have a form. It's just pure light. That's what God is. That's what essence is. This light gets showered on top of that soul who has just had a very difficult life, who maybe would have ended his life on this planet, goes into the spirit world. Okay? What happens next? Well, this soul will still get many opportunities to make up for what he or she did on this planet. Okay? So for example, if there are other people suffering from depression or schizophrenia, just like this soul did on a previous incarnation, that soul will be allowed to go back down in spirit form to help others who are suffering from this, because they'll understand what they're going through. Okay, so it could be a family member, it could be a relative, it could be someone else. If someone committed suicide, they may get the opportunity, because they know what suicide is and they know they made a mistake, they'll get the opportunity to go down to choose someone. It could be a family, a friend, or a relative, to make sure that they help them from the other side, from the spirit form, to make sure they don't do that either. Okay? So it's not black and white. It's not that it's over, because a lot of Orthodox religions believe after death you only have two options. If you were a good person, you'll go towards heaven, and that'll be it. Or if you're a bad person, you'll go towards hell. There are some beliefs that your soul will be held in the coffin. You're buried until the day of judgment. When the final day of judgment comes, and the angels will come and they'll make you rise. It's a very narrow-minded picture of what happens after death. Very narrow-minded, very negative, right? And like the Prophet used to say, every time I give you a revelation, it has two different meanings, internal meaning and external meaning. Now, external meaning can mean literal, based on our intellectual understanding or five sensory perception, very human, literal interpretation. Then there's the esoteric interpretation, spiritual. And he used to say, I'm not going to share the esoteric interpretation with you because you won't understand it. It'll break your throat. Break your throat means it'll cause utter confusion. Remember, 1400 years ago, it was a time of ignorance. If you don't go through kindergarten and grade 1 and grade 2, you don't learn your alphabet, what's the point of talking about what happens in grade 10 or grade 12 or the PhD level? There's no point. So if most of the souls are young at that point, you give them the basic instructions. Just leave it simple. When they're ready in the future, that's when you bring down the higher learning. So anyways, this concept of death, which is very black and white, that you either go to hell or heaven and there's nothing else. Oh my goodness, it's depressing. Now you have all kinds of different individuals trained in different areas talking about life after death. Brian Weiss, Michael Newton, regression therapy, Dolores Cannon. You have mediums. You have spiritual teachers are saying, whoa, your soul is a spark of God. It's a tiny spark of God. It comes from the light of God, but it has to make its way back. If you only have one chance in one lifetime, either you go to hell in the end or you go to heaven, my goodness, what chance do you have of going back towards the essence? That's a very limited way of doing things. Okay? And in fact, reincarnation was taught by a lot of the earlier prominent members of any religion, including Christianity. There were very prominent members that used to talk about reincarnation, but they were banned. Some of them were imprisoned too. So it's not that it's a new concept. Reincarnation, life after death, is in the Vedas, which is thousands of years old. Now we're coming together because we're living in this new age where spirituality, life after death, reincarnation, increasing your consciousness, all this talk about quantum physics and energy, it's all sort of different pieces of the puzzle that are helping us see the big picture. That there's a lot more to life than this, the physical body and the mind and the intellect. There's an entire essence behind that. So when you're in the spirit world, you still have many opportunities, no matter what kind of mistakes you made. Yes, you may need some special attention, you need more light, You might need more training because the way you lived your life in the previous life was not consciously, it was unconsciously. But it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. No. In fact, there are many opportunities that the divine will give you to correct things and to increase your consciousness. Okay, now, one of the main things when you're looking back at your past life is you'll be asking yourself, did I forgive? Did I use the power of forgiveness? Had I been a forgiving person, I would have been less angry, I would have been less judgmental, I would have been less controlling. I would have been a better husband, I would have been a better wife, I would have been a better father, I would have been a better mother. So I never used the power of forgiveness. Or for those who did use it, they're very, very happy with what they did. Okay? So forgiveness is at the center of your consciousness. That's why forgiveness is essential. Nobody's perfect. Okay? Nobody's perfect. Everybody is going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes too. Okay? But you have to come to the realization that you have to be a big enough person, first of all, to forgive and to ask for forgiveness. Okay? Now, I just want to point out, forgiveness doesn't mean to turn the cheek. If somebody comes and slaps you, say every so often somebody's slapping you. You hear of relationships where there's physical abuse, emotional abuse, and mental abuse. So forgiveness doesn't mean, say there, just as an example, in a marriage there are two people, and one person is abusing the other person, just as an example. Say the husband is abusing the wife, and constantly the husband is abusing the wife, physically, emotionally, mentally. Forgiveness doesn't mean to get abused, to continually get abused, no. Because every person and every soul has the God-given right not to get beaten up or to get abused. So this is something that has to be understood, that forgiveness doesn't mean that the other person gets taken advantage of. That's not the way it works. Okay? But on the other hand, you can take another scenario in a marriage where you have two people together. They're not perfect. They have their conflicts. They have differences of opinion. This is where you say, well, which marriage doesn't have their problems? Which is true. So it's a gray area, right? But you can have one person who's not necessarily abusive, but they're very stubborn. They don't want to change. Maybe they're lazy, or they don't want to work, or they don't want to spend time with their parents. They're not necessarily evil people. What do? This is a gray area. Okay? So maybe you'll use the power of forgiveness and say, okay, things are not perfect, things are not going well, but I will use the power of forgiveness, and I'll try to make this work because I have a relationship involved here, I have kids involved here, or I have other things involved, so I'll work at it. And maybe I'll use the power of forgiveness to achieve what my goals are. Okay? Then you might have another scenario where you have two people, this may be referred to as soulmates, where there's very little conflict because they understand each other really well. This doesn't happen very often, but that's another scenario that can take place, and where it doesn't matter what happens, they're always in a forgiving mode. Okay? Now, you've heard me use the term unconditional love. Well, there's another term I would like to say, and I would refer to it as unconditional forgiveness. Okay? Unconditional forgiveness has been displayed by a lot of the great enlightened masters. That's like taking forgiveness and just multiplying it to a level million or billion. Who's an example of that? Jesus Christ. When he was being put on the cross, the people who were putting him on the cross and giving him pain and making him bleed, he kept on saying, forgive them. It doesn't matter. They don't know what they're doing. When Mansur was being put on the cross, same thing happened. Okay? Any enlightened master who comes on this planet to guide you or show you the way, you better be sure that they're an example of unconditional forgiveness. Because the amount of times we mess up and screw things up and give them pain, it's unbelievable. But for them, there's not even a question of forgiveness. It's done. So forgiveness has levels. That's what I'm trying to say. You can start from a basic level, and then we can learn from these great masters, and it goes to a very high level. Okay? So when you're in the spirit world, one of the biggest questions you'll be asking yourself is that, was I a forgiving person? Okay? This is where you'll be asking yourself this question. And if you are a forgiveness person, all the other emotions, negative emotions and vices, can be transformed into positive energy. If you're forgiving, you will have less anger, you will have less resentment, You will have less sadness. You'll have less regret. You'll have more empathy. You'll have more compassion. Forgiveness is right at the center of all of this. You'll judge others a little bit less. And guess what? Your health will be a lot better. This example I gave you of the lady who got breast cancer, it's from all the conflicts that took place in her family. Okay? So, forgiveness essentially is a wonderful thing to do, but not at the cost of being abused or getting beat up. That's not what I'm saying. Okay? You have the right to deserve respect. Your soul comes from the light of God, so nobody's allowed to abuse that. And you have the right to fight for your rights. Okay? Certain things that are black and white, where there's physical, emotional, or mental abuse, every person has a right to get help and to change things, and they cannot be blamed. And when you're in the spirit world, you will not be blamed for that. But in those cases which are gray areas, and it's not black and white, and there's not necessarily abuse in the relationship, but there is struggle because people don't want to change, that becomes a gray area. And in that area, perhaps you can use forgiveness. Okay? There will be times in your life when there will be many times when you should be using forgiveness and letting go. From a karmic point of view, you will experience tremendous spiritual growth, and your karmic debt and responsibilities that you have to others, it will allow you to move on if you learn how to forgive. So this is something I want you to remember. When you're in the spirit world, your opportunity to increase your consciousness, it just continues. And once you stay in the spirit world for a certain amount of time, it's different for each person. Some people stay up for 10 years, some 20 years, some 30 years, and you get to reassess what you did in your previous life and what kind of improvements you can make. Then the universe and the divine gives you different opportunities to increase your consciousness. Okay? So heaven, in fact, is a wonderful place. There's no doubt about it. But there are different levels of consciousness within heaven, going from basic level to the highest level. And then eventually you want to transcend heaven too. You want to go towards God consciousness. But that happens at a very high level. This is just something I want you to remember, that there are many different levels of consciousness, but the universe and existence and God's creation, it's wonderful with many different layers. And our job is to take our consciousness from basic level of consciousness and go towards the universal consciousness, and eventually merging towards the universal consciousness. Okay? The big piece of the puzzle here for your soul and for your consciousness is forgiveness. Okay? So the more you can use the power of forgiveness, the better will be your chances for personal growth, spiritual growth, and ultimately spiritual enlightenment.